can I ask Nona about the poems you who wrote them and what was it from her own experience that she wrote them?
Yeah, so me and 9 other women had a writing workshop with Heather Raffo, and she's an amazing woman. And Nye Casey, one of the fellow members of the team, wrote this workshop, wrote the 2 monologues based on her experiences. And the workshop was more of a writing therapy for Middle Eastern women to kind of channel our difficulties as Middle Eastern Americans between this juxtaposition of like being American and Middle Eastern, what that means, and writing it into art. And so she wrote the 2 monologues as a form of therapy. She can't be here tonight, so as an actor, I was, oh, thank you.
There was so much talk about sexual liberation and getting rid of modesty culture, which is so wonderful. I was wondering if any of the female artists can speak to sort of a strain in Western feminism that in some ways is newly opposed to it. For example, there's a certain strain in Western feminism that's against pornography, and not just really despicable pornography, but really mainstream pornography. Just sort of curious for your thoughts on sort of what you think about this sort of new opposition to some of these similar ideas that you're all fighting for, but coming from a Western angle.
So, I mean, for me, I would disagree with you. I'm for modesty culture, and it makes me feel comfortable. And I feel like the sexualization of women is sort of making women as props. And we're not props. We're not supposed to be some kind of thing to be dangled and saying, "Oh, look, I'm a property, and like look at me, how pretty I look." And I think that you should feel comfortable with how you should be, and that's my opinion. Yeah. I'd like to say something to that.
Could I say something to that?
Yes,
As somebody who really I love clothes, and I'm a jewelry collector. I've been doing it for a very, very long time, and it's part of the zina. And I think that there are ways in which you can be modest and actually more sensuous than if everything is out there. And there are very, very rich traditions in the Arab world and in the Middle East, for example, where yes, you are not allowed to be seen, but you can wear jewelry that dangles and makes a sound. And so there is something called ghazal. There's a more fluid kind of asexuality that can be more subtle, and that there is an art form for it. And so for us to take one Western model and say that this is the way that we can express our sexuality or a more fluid sensuality, I think is very problematic. And I do think that individual women have the right, if modesty is a way of expressing yourself, that's fine. Also, I really recommend that you watch the film Caramel by the Lebanese director. And so there's a very, very rich tradition of wearing lingerie, of sensuality practiced in the private sphere. That my mother was a Muslim from Bosnia, so she was more conservative. When I went to Egypt, I was mortified and shocked at how openly people were talking about sex. My husband is here. My mother-in-law would say to me, "Are you eating well enough? Because, you know, soon you're going to be a bride." And I'd go home and I'd tell my mother, because there are cultural differences. Yes. But it was a sensuality that is expressed within different spheres in different ways, and what's considered sensuous in one culture varies. I mean, Indian women can show their stomach. I can never show my legs, but I'm fine showing my shoulders. So I think there's cultural nuance, there's multicultural, there's so much there, how women play with clothes.
Okay. So I've got like one, oh sorry, go ahead.
So to segue about clothes, so coming from, my background is in fashion, and so seeing the connection between sort of fashion and identity and something, this sphere, which over the years has evolved for me. My personal journey growing up here in the United States, Egyptian American. My mother and father came here at a time where, at the time in Egypt, it was, sort of the women that we see, it was very rare to see a hijabi at that time. And so I grew up here. It was a very Eurocentric understanding of what fashion should be. I let sort of this very Eurocentric Western lens of what was beautiful. It's been a journey for me so many years, 20 to 30 years, to finally sort of start to understand that in fact, it's sort of not what one is wearing, but it's in fact who's making the choice about what one wears. So I think it's really moving not so much from modesty culture, which I'm a firm believer in, to more of an inclusive culture. So it's the idea to empower women to decide to be completely naked and all their magnificent glory, or to decide what they show, to whom they show, when they show, and how they show. And so how they present, and to have that control in their private and public spheres. So moving that conversation to not necessarily a modesty culture or being pro or anti-hijab, but to moving to empower all of our sisters to express our beauty.
So I'll just conclude here. Yeah. All of these are symptoms. All of these, I agree with everything. I have no disagreements with you guys. You want to wear jeans? You want to wear a burqa? I will be the first one to defend your legal right to do that. Your social right to do that. But these are the questions men never have to even consider. That's at the heart of what I do. That if I were to walk naked, if I were to walk out shirtless, it should be just as much a non-issue as, and not just for me and the society, for every woman. Even the most devout religious Muslim man, for example, they go to a pond in whatever, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, whatever. They take their shirt off, they can jump in the pond. Non-issue. But that is not the case for women. And that is not the case for you, and that is not the case for you. And that is the reason why I will always be anti-modesty culture, until to the point a woman who says, I would never want to show my legs, I never want to show my breasts. Even somebody like Wafa Sultan, I don't know if you guys are familiar with her work. And she's like, and she agrees with me, but she says there's so much psychologically ingrained stuff in her head that she still feels weird, showing her breasts even to her husband. And she feels really weird about being clothless. So for me, it's a woman who's making a choice to be modest should be just as much comfortable as if it was not a choice. It's the same argument that I have with women who are hijabi, and then the strain of, to your point, the Western women who are oh, I'm going to wear a hijab too in solidarity. When is that hijabi woman going to take off her hijab and wear a bikini to support her sisters who are being stoned to death? Right? So
I'm comfortable with my body, but I'm also comfortable being.
But here's the thing, and I just want to, before we move on to the next question, there's a difference between modesty for yourself and modesty culture. So I think what Alishma's talking about is the culture where you impose your personal modesty upon others.
No, I don't think that's necessarily modesty culture.
There's also secularism culture where you impose your secularism upon others. It could go
modesty culture is the culture that the society imposes. That women
society imposes.
And then women make
patriarchy imposes.
Yeah, and then women make choices. For example, that jewelry dangling thing. That is a standard set by men. Oh, you can't be seen. But if you just show me, you're here are my bangles. Oh, I feel fuck you. Fuck what you want. I'm gonna wear what I want, and not necessarily to the comfort of men.
We're trying to shift the conversation to what patriarchy, what sort of the male gaze is sort of imposing on us, is what should be seen as beautiful, what we should reveal, what we should not reveal.
And
so to move the conversation from a patriarchy dictated understanding of the subjective idea of modesty or sexiness or all of these things, or sensuality, and to move that so that women are empowered to create that narrative.
Your choice is independent of what the man wants.
Right, but to respect our sisters who choose to be, that's one of the choices.
Absolutely.
If we support the choice,
but you can say one of the choices. Of course, that's what I said. But I don't have to agree with it.
I think we're getting a little testy here. I'll come back to you in a second. I'm sorry, you already asked a question. You have a question over there.
I actually wanted to just respond to a claim you made. You will never find me in any company to be the defender of Islam. However, when you were making that claim that the religion forbids women to have satisfaction sexually, I can tell you that that is a cultural perspective because, and I'll tell you, let me just finish. I grew up in a home with a very pious father who prayed 5 times a day, taught me all the values that I now cherish, despite the fact that I have my challenges with the religion. And he always told me that one of the reasons a woman can actually go and get divorced immediately is to say that I am not sexually satisfied by my husband. So that's one point.
That is a great
The other point is, so this is really a cultural difference. Maybe the Pakistani culture portrays sexuality in Islam differently than how I was raised. The other point I want to make, once upon a time in another one of my lives, I actually went to Hajj. And in Mina, which is the 3 days you spend with people in the desert, I saw African women, I mean, to my amazement, that were actually bathing with their breasts showing, a bunch of women, because culturally their showing of their breast is not forbidden, and so it does not qualify as a awrah. So when you talk about Islam, talk about it from only the perspective of your experience.
Yes, so here's the comment to that. Sexuality, when I say that it forbids, don't enjoy sex, I am also told, what I'm talking about, I'm not like within the confines of marriage itself, right? That you can't go around, have sex for the sake of sex. You are having sex within the confines of marriage. You're having sex. Marriage is mandatory in Islam for reproduction, to propagate Muslim ummah. Right? That's why it's like one of these sunnahs that you're supposed, that's why there's no such thing as like celibacy like you have in Catholicism. You don't have that in Islam.
The Prophet had wives that he didn't have kids with, so.
Of course he had wives he didn't have kids with. One of them was 9 years old. But the point is also that in religion itself, outside sex, outside wedlock, can you tell me that it's like absolutely 100% fine for a woman or a man to just go around and be like, I just want to have sexual experiences? That is
We have other people that have questions, sorry.
I can tell you that this is a conversation we can really get into another time, but again, what you're saying is factually wrong.
But what reason?
From my understanding of Islam.
So a Muslim woman or man can just go around and have sex outside wedlock, and that's absolutely gloriously fine in the religion.
No, but there are ways to enjoy sex if
so
you
within
want.
the confines of the religion and the wedlock itself.
Well, that's why you belong to a religion.
That's why.
We're here to sort of talk about within Muslim culture, no? So what we're talking about is this in all of the culture.
And again, that's what I said. It's one of the reasons why I'm fighting against it. That is one of the major reasons. And that's what falls.
So we have a lot of questions coming.
One last comment.
It's getting crazy.
This whole division that is religion, not culture.
There's like 25 people that put their hands up.
I already addressed this in the first opening sentence when I was in my. Okay.
It's all of the religions agree that sex should be within the confines of marriage. So if you're having a conversation about
why I think religion is bullshit in the first place. Also, I addressed that whole culture.
Everybody, can we stop for a second? This topic is a really controversial topic. And the theme of this is art. So let's ask anybody. Yeah, do you have any questions? Do you have a question about art?
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe you. So I don't know if I believe you and your question.
No.
I think I'm going to go real quick to Wissam. He's got a question.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, it's going to seem weird now asking this question, but I have a question for you. So actually, did you get that? You said you sent an email to your brothers. I was interested in the response when you sent it about your change of career.
Not about what you wore, just about your career.
I don't know. Do you guys want to shift the conversation?
Yes.
The conversation?
This conversation is really old and can go on for hours.
Basically, the email response was one of the oldest brothers told me this is the biggest mistake of my life. And I understand where he's coming from. Again, I guess that's the value of empathy, where you understand where people's coming from, because they want to basically they want the best for you. The other brother was supportive, and the other two brothers didn't reply to him.
What about now?
That's totally fine. I guess that's supportive.
Okay.
Silence is supportive.
What about today?
I would say, like,
Now that you're kind of famous.
Of the opinions of others, generally speaking, but basically they just accept my decision. They have concerns sometimes, of course, but they accept my decision, and that's respectful.
Anybody other?
This is beautiful.
All right. What's your question?
Okay, so as artists and as people that, regardless of how religious you identify or don't identify, we're living in an age that is very xenophobic and very Islamophobic, and I feel like we can all kind of agree on that and agree that it affects all of us. And as someone that is an artist myself, like I'm a photographer and a writer, and I believe that that can be used to sort of combat the xenophobia that we're seeing. So can you guys sort of speak to like your experiences with that, and has that impacted your art in any way?
So,
Other than
an artist.
Yeah. Go ahead, Emery.
So yeah, like especially like in my art, I wanted to show not only things that I didn't like in Islam. I put things that I like in the New Testament as well, because that for me that. It was always the question that I would ask, well, why do you always criticize Islam and everything else? Well, I have a problem with Islam because Islam controls my life. Other religions don't control people's lives like Islam does. But even with that, I wanted to show the things that I didn't like in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, and other religions. And I wanted to show other things that have positive value for me, which scientific. So that's why I showed 3 pieces. One was Quran that I changed, and one was New Testament that I think is just bad, and that people just don't acknowledge that it's bad. Everybody tell you like, well, the Old Testament is bad, but the New Testament is no.
Torture you, but after death.
Well, no, actually, like there's like the examples that I had is like women should not have authority over men. Slaves should respect your lords and masters with all obedience. That's in the New Testament. That's
fetishizing virginity.
Yeah, so I just feel like there's no everybody's like, well, Jesus was peaceful, the New Testament is nice. No, it's not. It's just as bad, and we need to acknowledge that.
say something to that? I'm constantly arguing with people about xenophobia, bigotry, identity, and stuff. So when I do my photography, to be honest, it's the one place where I feel like I can be a human being and connect to the natural world. So I do a lot of landscape photography, and I do write a lot, because to me that is the one place where I think I can experience my humanity as a living being who is really enamored of the earth. So to me it's actually a way of escaping all the strife. And it's almost, and I think it's...
Shireen, do you have the answer? You were about to say something?
I was also going to say how to combat Islamophobia in Hollywood, because we're kind of used as political props to justify America's wars in the Middle East. So, they show Homeland and we're all barbarians, and therefore we need to go into the Middle East to save the Middle East. The white man savior complex is all over Hollywood. So what I do, to the best of my ability, because I'm not really at that point yet in my career where I can turn down roles, but if I do accept a role, I can be the actor that calls people out on their ignorance, and just lay them with the facts, right? There was this one audition I had where, I didn't get the part, but I was the production assistant for the same scene, just so happened to be hired to help with the scene. And the props master put wine in front of the hijabi character, and I told him, well, if she's hijabi, she wouldn't be drinking wine. And the props master said, oh, if I put water, it would look bad. But then I said, well, this is offensive, like she would, and no, he tried to justify it at first and say, oh no, she's just one of those hijabis that drinks. And I'm like, oh, but wait a minute, props master who's not even anywhere close to the Middle East. That wouldn't happen. And so he's like, oh well, whatever, it will look bad. So it's just like, trying to...
Can I say something to that? That does happen.
That does happen.
I know hijabis.
And a lot more than you pregnant.
So maybe this would be a good time for me to talk about the power of the image, right? So the image and representation, and so sort of like, you know, who sort of has control of the narrative, who has control over sort of how people are represented. And so yes, of course, we would imagine that there are hijabis who are drinking, but I mean, sort of again, trying to just at least have someone to represent, to say, you know, to educate and kind of say, you know, this is in general the idea of what a hijab, you know, how somebody who wears hijab, what the idea is, the concept of a lifestyle that includes a hijab. And so again, I guess just to answer the question, the idea of representation, again, coming from fashion and media and beauty, we're kind of aware now that we're sort of in an era, hopefully more and more and more all of you are starting to see that in fact, it's not just one skin tone that is starting to sort of be glorified as beautiful, but in fact, many skin tones are beautiful, and in fact, different sized bodies are beautiful, and it's not just hair that makes us beautiful. So it's recently, too, in my own illustration,
I think we have time
I started to try to create
one more question.
Those different images.
Can I add to the same thing?
All right, go quick.
So the way I do this in my photography is I always place things where in my like non-commissioned personal projects, place things where they're not supposed to be. So in my most recent photo shoot, I used a plus size girl, and I used the Afghani Pashtun jewelry that you're only supposed to wear, like, you know, with modest bridal, whatever, you never wear it. And I used her in a topless, yeah, you don't see photos of Afghani people, like Afghani jewelry. You only see them with the Afghan entire outfit. So I used the jewelry in itself and then used it with a topless girl and then made the jewelry more of the focus, and then how it's taken out from that culture. Culture that was otherwise very colorful and beautiful, and then became, you know, hidden. And then one of my art pieces that I wasn't able to bring here today is in a big canvas. There's an entire beautifully henna done on its back. That becomes the focus of that, and look at that. I just try to like put that in my boudoir photography more than anything else. Bring the beautiful elements of the cultures that I identify with and put them in places where they're not supposed to be or they're not seen, so that becomes the focus of it and starts a conversation.
Okay, so I'm really sorry for everybody that I'm not going to ask. Anna.
So, give this guy.
All right.
I go last.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you guys feel about the contest of drawing Muhammad? Drawing Muhammad. Muhammad drawing contest. Like there's one in...
There was a contest, there's a contest that's held by
who's sponsoring it?
certain right-wing groups that draw Muhammad. And it's more for offending.
Drawing Muhammad.
Yeah, no, it's completely offensive. Like, what Islam is that sort of like, anything that could be considered as idolatry, right, is like, so drawing face Muhammad because you might associate that face with the figure when that's not the point is the message. So, or anything that is supposed to be idolatry, like, no, just, you're supposed to be.
Then don't look at it.
So just, no, but like,
it is not the artist's responsibility to take care of your feelings. It's like when I was in my...
I'd like to hear Hadi, because he hasn't spoken much. And he's only spoken about the oud.
I didn't talk much about the
I'm joking. I spoke more about it.
I think that, for my own understanding, that Islam is much bigger than this. It's bigger than the image of the Prophet. It's bigger than hijab. It's bigger than the practices. So when I go into this self-reflection journey of mine, and I read about what Imam Ali said, I read about what Ibn Arabi said, and the journeys that those people have went through to talk about oneness to talk about how everyone from across the world, everyone that existed and will exist and exists now, are a part of one thing. This to me is what interests me in the religion. And yes, there are people in every religion that have different understanding of a few things, and they get sometimes like so focused on the surface, and they get so focused on things that really bring on anger and issues that they need to rebel against to feel, rebellious and to feel to go against what's been taught to them. And that's something that is, to me, it's not very much interesting to me. What interests me the most about the philosophies and the ancient philosophies in this world, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Taoism, etc., and the common thing that these amazing philosophies have been studying, and I just mentioned a few religious, but there are so many like non-religious, but they're all spiritual, is about like that inner struggle, that thing that brings us together. And yes, it sounds romantic and it sounds nice, but this is the essence of it. Music-wise, like in terms of fighting Islamophobia, and that also it's not really. I don't focus on this so much. I was brought up Muslim. I was surrounded by Muslims. One of my best friends, some of my best friends are Muslim. I don't know if you knew that. I'm trying my best to just be. I play music. I try to share beauty. And I hope, there's a big machine, of course, that exists in multiple countries with a lot of money and a lot of planning. There's a big machine that's trying to focus on one part of this group of people, of humans, and portray like this one side that I disagree with oftentimes, and agree with other times, it depends. But the thing is, it's much larger than this. What is Muslim? Can you define to me what is Muslim? Can you define to me Islam in one, just give me one definition of that? What is feminist? No, I don't agree with you on that.
That's an opinion.
But that's the, no, Quran is, okay, all right. But that's the thing, like, we could spend time just throwing words here and this and try to, like, argue for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
But it's not, what's the objective of all of this? You talk about feminists and you say that, if you wear a hijab, you're not a feminist. How do you define feminism? All of my aunts and my
Who are you to define one sole definition of
feminism?
No problem.
The choice is not
there are multiple things, and it's also how you present yourself. When you're someone who's like, over talking other people and taking more time over your
that's
time.
exactly what you did.
That's the thing. Is like when you do this, you also present a part. You present a part that's not really approachable to me. Like I feel offended by it. So when you talk about feminist person, and you say like if you're not a hijab, you're not a feminist. I tend to think that this is also like we don't have a common understanding of that term, which is often the case in most conflicts in the world. We don't have common understanding of the term. My mother wears hijab, my aunts wear hijab, in a different way than people in Pakistan or India or Malaysia wears hijab. That's a different thing. And they've endured multiple wars. They've raised all of their children to their best abilities. They have been very present in the society. They've been like working, have full-time jobs, and they've been saying no to any bullshit they received that they didn't believe in. So how does that have a person that is not a liberal, strong person? Again, like I don't tend to use the word feminist that much because it doesn't. I don't think people, because it's actually the trend, and whenever something is the trend and it's used by multiple people, hey, I could, throw this table because I'm a feminist now. Come on, like I need to understand what you mean by that, and then you could come to the table and talk to me about it. So, just by being the artist I am, I feel that I'm representing a part of Islam that is not portrayed in most of the.
So, I would love for this conversation to continue, and it should continue. However, we have this thing called I know that Ali doesn't believe in it, but we have this thing called time, and we're way over that time. So we have some workshops. Wissam and Adnan.
Wait,
Hannah, but you know the timing thing.
No,
of all people.
I know. And as the morning MC, I would be so annoyed if someone's like, "Want to give a comment?" But I want to get one. So sorry, because I'm not the MC.
Wissam, don't blame me.
All right. So all I wanted to say was that I know that this conversation was really controversial, and some people might have really strong emotions right now on one side or the other. But something I love about Muslimish is that we as a community can have this conversation, and we can grow as a community, we can debate with each other, and it's a safe space that we can gather to talk about this. So I wanted to say thank you for all the artists and all of your perspectives, because I appreciated every single one that I've heard today. Thank you.
Adnan and Wissam will be outside for their workshops. Hadi, you'll be in here for your workshop. And whoever wants to go to whatever workshop you want to go to, go for it.